do want to invite Devyn Carter back to us. This is his third time speaking to our community. The first time I think was maybe 5 years ago or so when I
Even
first met
longer.
Devyn, even longer than that, perhaps.
Yeah, 2015
Um,
or so.
yeah, and we were discussing at that time certainly the very interesting work that he has done with primates, specifically chimps, and their connection to human life and our relationship with them, our species and theirs. That was really wonderful. That was back at the American Jewish University. About a year ago, I would say, we had Devyn come back to talk about this book, which I think has a new cover now, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
I did a little second version slight update, but it's
Oh,
mostly the
excellent.
same. Yeah.
Excellent. So this is the anthropologist's dilemma, where he talks about essentially being an evolutionary biologist, anthropologist, talking to students who are in a predominantly Christian landscape, and how to navigate those kinds of discussions with people who might oppose on instinct some of those suggestions and facts that come from evolutionary biology, etc. We didn't record that one, unfortunately, but great book if you get a chance to read it. Today, Devyn will be talking to us about his latest book, The Anthropology of Celebrity. And I'm going to read just a bit of Devyn's bio from the back of the book and the description of the book as well. And Devyn, please keep your ears open and add anything that you want to. But here it goes. Devyn Carter conducted non-invasive behavioral and cognitive research with chimpanzees at the Living Links Center at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, under the guidance of Franz de Waal. He received his MA in anthropology from Georgia State University, where he subsequently taught. Currently, he teaches and works with children on the autism spectrum in Los Angeles, California. And there is more to Devyn's biography that is quite relevant to this book about celebrities, but I'll let you divulge what those are in a moment. But here's the premise of the book. A number of questions that I think are all very relevant and will resonate with us. Have you ever met or caught a fleeting glimpse of a famous person? Or have you ever fantasized what it would be like to be in the company of a celebrity? What would you say? How would you behave? What would they think of you in turn? Even if you've never encountered anyone who is well known, you have no doubt met members of your own community who are held in high regard, perhaps the town mayor, a religious leader, or local entertainer. When you see this person, your posture improves, your face lights up with a smile. You hope to make eye contact and possibly start up a conversation. We enjoy being in the presence of and associating with prestigious people. It makes us feel good. But why is this? How do these types of interactions benefit us, or them for that matter? The anthropology of celebrity explores our cultural need to include people of higher status in our day to day lives, even though we may only see them via television, films, and social media. The stories and observations in this book are written from an LGBTQ oriented perspective. So, Devyn, welcome, and please elaborate on anything I just shared.
No, I didn't realize I had gotten so much on the back of the book. That's good. Yeah, it's just something that I had noticed a long time ago. I was a model in the '90s, and I moved out to Los Angeles. This is before becoming a parent many years ago, and it's just something that I noticed a lot. And this is before I had done anything really towards anthropology or working with primates or anything like that. And so the experiences that I had living in Hollywood and trying to become an actor, which in the book I discuss how that really wasn't my thing, but I thought I would give it a try. I just noticed that certain people, just because of their perceived status or stature in the community, were treated differently, and that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. People seem to enjoy it. There's a lot of the theme in this book of, well, that seems to make people feel good to be in association with people such as this. I can relate to that once I started working for Franz de Waal, because he's so big in the field and I consider him to be a mentor. And so whenever Franz, even to this day, is he's become a friend, and his wife, whenever I'm around them, I'm very kind of self-aware of how I'm presenting myself, even though I'm also very relaxed. It's just a really weird thing. It's like just aware, oh, I'm with someone who is of very high status in their world. So his world is primatology and biology and primate research and chimpanzee behavior, but it's very much analogous to someone who we see on television all the time, who's come into our room, into our living rooms for decades or things like that. It just does something to you. It brings about this sense of like you know them, even in many cases we really don't even know them, but we feel like we do, and that seems to resonate with so many of us, even if you're not really into movies and television that much and it's not your thing. That's why I also include, it could be a church or religious leader, it could be, you know, somebody in your community, it could be any number of people, it could be a family member who does a certain specific type of job, or there's lots of different ways that people who are of higher status seem to catch our attention, and it kind of gets all of our neurons firing of this person, I need to pay attention to this person for whatever reason. And I think that that has biological and evolutionary roots.
Thank you. Yeah, couple of things. I mean, I really enjoyed reading the book,
Thank you.
and it's told in a very um, conversational and appealing way. And you throw in little tidbits from the sciences, the social sciences, but by and large, it's part autobiographical and part trying to figure out why even you, as someone who seems a bit jaded, uh, when it comes to celebrities and that kind of status seeking and all that kind of stuff, even you have those kinds of feelings. I think that it
Absolutely.
really, yeah. And I think to your point, I mean, like we can't escape it on a certain level. It's precognitive or pre-rational.
It is. Yeah, I like how you phrase that. I think that it is. It's just something that we just kind of default to it under certain circumstances when we're in certain environments and under certain situations. And I think that living in Los Angeles, it is particularly relevant because this is kind of the cultural hub of the planet for entertainment and entertainers. And not so much here in Burbank, which is funny because they have a lot of studios here. We live very close to Warner Brothers. Occasionally see people that you recognize. But when I lived on the other side of the mountain, all the time in West Hollywood, just everywhere you go. You can't even go to the grocery store without seeing somebody who's world famous for something. And it shouldn't strike me as being that, after a while you'd think you'd be like, oh, whatever. But I'm always very like, oh, that's so and so, especially if it's somebody that I love. And you can see that there's people in the book that I'm like, all right, I love this person, and this is why. This is why I love this person. This is why this person occupies a space in my, and creating part of my interests and my, like I can see that the Stranger Things thing behind you. That my daughter just loves Stranger Things, which we finally allowed her to watch. And she just, she would love to see someone of that, or she wants to kind of act like the girls in the show. And, it's just, there's an emulation there that I think is actually tied to primatology more than I chose to do in this book. I kind of went away from primatology. I could have leaned more into it, but I wanted this one to be less academic and more it's cultural anthropology. It's kind of an autoethnography of sorts. Which some anthropologists don't think is a thing, but I'm decided I'm going to do it anyway. So yeah.
I like that concept, the autoethnography. I'm going to look into that. Um, so a couple of things, just reading the book, and on the first page you name drop, right, Franz de Waal, and I think that was probably intentional. The idea that he is himself, as you mentioned, if the others aren't familiar with Franz, world famous primatologist, written many very popular books on the subject, and a real force in terms of getting people to realize that animals have deeper inner lives than we might have previously thought in such topics. But one of the things that I remember, Devyn and I were at Devyn invited me to join him for a talk at UCLA
UCLA.
some years ago, and Franz was the speaker. And afterwards, Franz came and shook Devyn's hand, and I noticed the people around were like in awe of you for having some kind of personal relationship with Franz.
Yeah,
And you do
yeah.
talk about that in the book too. There's something that rubs off on the person who knows the famous person.
It is. It increases your, even if it's just a fleeting thing in the moment, it increases your your visibility kind of by proxy, I guess. It's just like, you know so and so, or you have access to so and so, and people seem to like that and gravitate towards that if it's someone that they no. Franz is not famous in Hollywood, so people wouldn't notice him walking down the street, but in that particular field, he's world renowned. So it's anybody who came to the talk knows definitely who he is, most likely. So it does, and like I said, even for me, when I spend time with him and his wife, and when I go back to Atlanta, we go hiking, and they have me over for dinner, and it does have a different feel to it. I do feel like, and he's such a kind person, so it's a very relaxed thing. But there's just that awareness, and plus, that's my thing. I love primates and I love primatology, and so it's like, it's kind of the pinnacle of that. If there's something else that you're into, if you're into race car driving, you might want to meet the people who are top, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's so universal. This kind of like, oh, this is the person who stands at the top of whatever this particular thing is. And it's an emotional attachment. It's a cognitive attachment. There's a lot of different ways that it lights up our brains. And I think it's largely positive if it's viewed from that way. And it's not about, the book is not about let's latch on to somebody who is well known and kind of ride that train and do the whole, follow people around in Hollywood because you think it might rub off on you. That's not at all what I am interested in exploring. It's more about this kind of innate, as you mentioned, kind of it's before you even think about it. It's precognitive kind
Yeah.
of.
I like how at the end of the book you do say, some of the readers might expect you to have interviews with famous people, and you said, very articulately why that wasn't a part of your agenda.
Yeah, it was
Um,
a lot.
right. So I think it's really interesting to think about it in terms of, the chimp human spectrum, and this idea of, following influencers, because that's
Mhm.
certainly a big thing now with social media and
Huge.
everything else, where, like you were saying, the Stranger Things role models, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
um and one thing that really struck me, and I don't know if you probably touched on it in the book a little bit, but I'm gonna leave names out of this. You were at a Toys R Us of blessed memory
Yes.
um
That
several
was sad
years
when they
ago.
closed that place.
I know, and here's my Joffrey.
Yes. Oh yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, it's my little shrine. Um, but yeah, you kind of saw a celebrity there shopping with her daughter or son, and you instantly recognized her. She could tell that you kind of recognized her too, and gave you kind of the stink eye and like, leave me
Yeah, it
alone.
was kind of
I'm
like,
just
don't
here
do it.
shopping.
She was like, don't do it.
Yeah,
And it was such a micro expression. And that's why, even though it was a fleeting interaction, it was important for me to include it because I felt like her one little look at me it just spoke volumes. I'm here. And so I read into that of, I'm here. I've got my baby and a baby Bjorn. I'm shopping for Christmas presents with my family. Don't, the
right.
paparazzi was outside. So it was just so understood. It was a passing thing of, all right, don't mess with this pop star who looks like she could get on stage any minute right now. She's ready to go. Don't mess with her. She's with her family. I'm with my family. Move on. But it really was, it was a moment because I couldn't I had to kind of suppress it to
Right.
not have this big gasp of recognition and go, oh my God. I'm sure that happens all the time to so many of these people. But I'm like, just don't. So
Yeah. So I'm thinking though, that kind of annoyance with the constant infatuation. Do you see that in chimps, where the alpha chimp sort of gets annoyed by the others who are fawning over him all the time, or anything
I,
like that?
I sometimes see other lower ranking or maybe not as high as the alpha get aggravated with the alpha because with alpha males in particular, not necessarily females, but sometimes because the alpha often takes liberties in social situations, as do
Hmm.
humans.
Sure.
And it can have an adverse effect at some point where it's like, listen, I know you're the boss, but you're driving me crazy. It
Hmm.
can be because they steal food, which normally when a chimp gets the food, they get to keep it. But there are chimps who take food out of the mouths of other chimpanzees if they're lower ranking enough. Constant requests for sex from chimpanzees who are not receptive for whatever reason. Female chimpanzees have a monthly cycle where they become very swollen, and that is very enticing to the male, but that does not mean that they're necessarily receptive to sex, and the male can be very aggressive about it. So often it's the other way around, where it's not the alpha who's irritated, it's the other subordinates who, depending on the style of that particular alpha, can sometimes become agitated with how they are. Now, I think a lot of times they do appreciate the attention. If it, the alpha in a chimpanzee group, they really do. They benefit from it. Animals benefit from being on the at the top tier. We do too, in that sense. So they do. I don't ever see them getting annoyed with it unless they don't get what they want. But as far as fawning, I don't. I wouldn't say that the subordinates fawn. They groom. They might groom them a lot more, but that's more to build a cohesive bond. So yeah, Franz might look at it a little bit differently, but there's an awareness with other chimpanzees of who are the higher ranking individuals, and the higher ranking individuals make themselves quite known, so it's apparent. But I don't know. Usually their irritation is if they don't get what they want, not because it's like, no, no more grooming, please. I've had enough grooming. They're like, no, give me more grooming, give me more bananas. I'll take your food. I want to have access to the individuals I want to have access to when I want to. So they can be a little more despotic in that way sometimes. I mean, not all male chimpanzees. Some of them are quite magnanimous and social, and they tend to keep their positions longer. So yeah.
Wow. I mean, what you're saying has such a close parallel in human celebrity culture.
Yeah.
I wonder, I mean, you certainly in the book talk a bit about celebrities who take advantage of, lower class people, or people who are less, who have less status, I should say.
Mhm.
Um, what is that all about in terms of the entitlement that people of that stature tend to think they are entitled to?
It's so hard for me to put my finger out. There's probably a lot of different explanations of it. I think that once you get to be at a certain place, especially if it's in Hollywood or in this kind of celebrity culture, that entitlement seems, it's almost like you trick yourself into thinking that you're more important than you really are. And that's what I think irritates a lot of people about celebrity culture. It's like, hey, I'm well known. I've got I'm mentioned online a lot, and I'm trending and this and that. And I think that it gives a lot of people license to, if they're not such a, empathic or whatever, understanding, interactive kind of person, I think it gives some people license to take advantage of the situation. And I do think that there are probably parallels to that with primates and other sentient animals as well. It's just this, like, everybody around me is feeding towards me that I'm a big deal, right? So I must be a big deal because everybody is telling me that, yeah, I've got a few detractors who are, trashing me in the DMs or whatever. But for the most part,
Yeah.
people seem to know I'm a big deal. And therefore, things need to go my way, and I would like to do A, B, and C. And I want that to just, and I think that that's unfortunate. I certainly don't think that all celebrities or people in that field are like that at all. But it's inescapable. You see the parallel that I make in the beginning. I make a segue from chimpanzees to the Kardashians. It's like this kind of, like, you can't help but notice them. I have never seen an episode of that show, but I hear the word Kardashian all the time, right? And they have done so well for themselves. Their business model works, as I mentioned in the book. So it's this, everybody looks at what they're doing, even if we don't want to look at what they're doing.
Yeah, I think you did touch on that in the sense that those who are gracious and magnanimous as celebrities tend to keep their status longer. Maybe that's true for human
Yeah.
society as well. We certainly know of
Yeah. Think of
Fall,
Dolly
Fall
Parton,
from
for
Grace.
example.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
Dolly Parton would be
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, I think that there's something to be said for that. Um, you know, what happens afterwards, right? After you've become a has-been, after being a
That's
having
high.
everything. I mean, I'm sure there's parallels there as well in the primate world. Like when you
Oh,
drop
certainly.
from your alpha status.
Oh, they become despondent. The males. The females are more okay with it. The males are just injured, like emotionally and personally, and sometimes physically. Just like, oh no, they get bummed out. They eventually figure it out, but it's hard to get dethroned.
That's
Yeah,
amazing of the
yeah,
parallels.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels there. I talk in the book about Justine Bateman, who's Jason Bateman's sister, who was on Family Ties, and she was so hugely famous. She has a book about fame. She's very blunt and just her language is very coarse in her description of what it was like to be so hugely famous and then to now be not very famous. And I'm reading between the lines when I read her book, which helped me research this book, about how difficult that was for her. And then people starting to say really cruel things about her physically as she chose not to do plastic surgery and things like that. And as she has aged, like we all, if we're so lucky, we get to age. I'm 51. I'm so happy that I get to be in my 50s and continue and go beyond. Not everybody gets to do that. So she talks about how people react to her as a woman, which is not fair, that she's judged more harshly about her appearance, and that it was a tough fall for her to go from being so famous during the 80s to now not so famous, and how just standing around at a party in Hollywood that people would say to her is really hard for her to cope with. Have a you have to build up some resilience to that, which it's not easy today with social media, because the comments are so, everybody's an expert on everything in America, right? Everybody knows everything about everything. They're like, I know this person's, everything they've ever done and said is horrible and ridiculous. And it's, it gets to be a pile-on, happens very quickly. It can't be easy to have that kind of plummet.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine.
Yeah, me too.
You know, it's kind of weird. I'm not going to be braggadocious by any stretch, but talking about people being kind of well known in their field or whatever. I mean, I have kind of a reputation also in my limited fields of Jewish studies,
Absolutely.
etc. I mean, it's nothing that I'm at all arrogant or
Of course.
bloated about, but it is really weird when I get a call from somebody who has read my stuff and really is like nervous to talk to me, or if I run into somebody who knows my name, it makes me so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As just a normal, I'm gonna say humble guy, even though I
Yes.
know humble people aren't supposed to call themselves humble. But setting that aside, I was doing a funeral the other day, and the funeral director had read one of my books, and he was like putting the red carpet out for me and stuff like that. It was just really weird. And I wonder if, the celebrity who gets that treatment and then doesn't get it anymore, if that can actually be seen as a positive, if it's not something that they're after, you know what I mean?
I think that it probably can be, and I would imagine that for some celebrities it probably is. You don't have, you no longer have to live up to the, whatever way the wind is blowing of popularity contests that we shouldn't be worried about as grown adults. Once if you become known for something, and then a lot of times these days, especially, which I think is great, if you were a person who was popular on a TV show or a movie or whatever, there's these little cult followings. So you can still kind of go around to, Comic Con and Dragon Con and this and that, and you can, still have your little cohort of people who love you if you have to, if that's a need that you need to have fulfilled or whatever,
Right.
or not even just a need you have to fill, but it's paying your bills, right?
Yeah.
So there's these little micro worlds that we can all divide up in now with this huge, big world that we have. But I think that the pressure to not be on the top anymore is probably it. It probably eventually brings about a sense of relief for people who are like, okay, it's a normal ebb and flow that 99% of people who are well known experience this ebb and flow. Unless you're just really, unless you're Meryl Streep, you're and a few other people, there's going to be lulls in your world. And I think I talk about in the book with that was hard for Debbie Reynolds, who back in her day was so hugely famous, and then to have that decline. Carrie Fisher talks about how that was very, very hard for her mother to go through, to experience that. And she's like, but that's what happens to all of us here. The only thing, it's like, it's to become not famous is just like almost more painful than to have ever been famous at all, in that respect. It feels like a
Yeah.
physical pain for some people.
You reminded me of an album that came out now years ago, but it was kind of a surprise hit at the time. It was a William Shatner spoken word like rock album. that he did with Ben Folds and other people. And he has a song on there which is basically him reflecting on it himself. You know, I don't know if he wrote the lyrics or not, but saying it's better to have been, or it's better to be a has been than a never
Yeah.
was essentially the line, right? So at least he has that, right? Even
Right.
if he falls out of the public light, he still has his Star Trek fans and whatever else,
He
right?
does. And he may rocket himself to space every now and then
Yeah, that's
for a few
true.
minutes. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. He
Um,
finds ways to maintain that relevance. He's 90 years old this
yeah, it's amazing.
year. Yeah.
One of our Jewish cultural secular role models, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Speaking of Jews and such, I mean, this is our humanistic Jewish community.
Yes.
I wonder if you can help me to understand something that happened to me. Um, I mean, this is not about me, and I'm not calling myself a celebrity, but I was in a group of in a band that was performing for a play in. It ran for a few weeks in Malibu, the Malibu Playhouse. This was years ago, and the play, which was called Jews and Jesus, I think, it was about Christian Jewish. I don't even remember actually. It was not very good, but um, the actors weren't treating us very well as a band. They were sort of looking down on us, you know, getting frustrated with us or whatever, as we were frustrated with them. It was kind of a messy production. But the LA Times sent a reviewer and wrote that the play was pretty bad, but the band was great, you know. And then the next day, when we came back to perform, everyone was like bowing down to us.
Yeah.
So I know that this kind of thing happens when actors in particular are trying to climb up the ladder. They want to attach themselves to a success because I think you talk about it as the overconfidence effect or something like that,
Yes.
where if you're in the midst of someone who is perceived as, you know, successful in
Right.
some way in the field, then you want to latch onto them as if that's going to rub off on you and you're going to be the next big thing. I
Right.
mean, my example is such a tiny little nothing,
No, but I
but
think it's perfect.
yeah, yeah.
It,
Try to
illus-
try to
it
help us
illustrates
understand
that.
that.
It illustrates it really well because I think for so many people, and maybe this is just a human thing, and maybe I have done it, I don't know. But when someone or some group of people are perceived as being lower ranking, then there's no need for, let's just say it's a chimpanzee. For the chimpanzees do this thing called pant grunting, where they go up to a more dominant individual and they sometimes they'll hold out their hand or they'll make a vocalization like like I'm here, kind of like I need you to be nice to me. I'm acknowledging who you are, but a chimpanzee doesn't go up to a lower ranking chimpanzee and pant grunt. They do that to a higher ranking individual. Now, so you will see sometimes with chimpanzees that an individual in the group will go from low ranking to high ranking for whatever reason. They have really good social smarts. They're physically have a lot of prowess. It's usually a combination of those two things. So then chimpanzees who would have never pant grunted to them ever, maybe they grew up as their aunt or relative or whatever, and then suddenly they begin to acknowledge that this person is in a position of power. And sometimes, if you're doing something, if you show up someplace and you're a low person on the totem pole for whatever reason, and the other people think, oh, we're always trying to, for better or for worse, we're trying to judge our place in the world. Where am I in the world versus where you all are? Not necessarily in a looking down on other people, but just to kind of know where we are socially. And I think sometimes groups of people in certain professions maybe need to feel like, okay, we're here and these people are here. So we're doing our thing and they don't understand what we're doing or whatever. And then so the lower ranking people, maybe it makes them feel a little bit better to be like, oh, whatever, you guys, you're not really, this is what it's all about. We're actors and you're here doing music. So, okay, whatever. But then you all got some attention in it and you got attention in a broader, like in the form of like a newspaper or whatever article comes out, something online that elevated you. So then they're kind of like, oh, okay, it just changes their perception. They're like, oh, other people out there are noticing them. Maybe I need to notice them as well. What if they're kind of on the rise and I'm still being kind of like not cool to them? It doesn't serve you well to continue to necessarily put some sort of barrier between you and a higher ranking or someone who, even if it's just a temporary little thing where you've risen to the top for a minute, people seem to notice that. They seem to know. Baboons notice that. Elephants notice that. Whatever it could be. It doesn't have to be people. We notice when somebody, other eyes are looking at them. When it's like looking at, oh, look, something's happening over there. Everybody looks. If you go outside your house right now and look up, and your neighbors see you, they're going to look up. We want to look and see what's going on. And if it's something that is something elevated in status, even if it's just perceptual, we make all these things up, right? These are all made up things. Mm-hmm. So it just does something where you're like collectively like, oh, maybe we should pay these guys a little bit more attention. We may need them to come and perform for us in the future or whatever it is. Also, maybe they feel a little bit bad that they weren't being very nice to you guys. I don't know, but they should, because that's not okay. But it does change it a little bit. And I've had sometimes people, oh, Franz or this or that. And I feel like it would make me feel really awkward and uncomfortable if anybody ever thought, that sometimes if a friend says, oh, you're a writer. I'm like, I don't know. I don't really think I'm a writer. I'm an artist. I love to paint. To me, it's an extension of a form of creativity mm-hmm. that I try not to overthink. And yet I do. And I try to put my words down, but it's just me trying to get something down. It has nothing to do with I'm trying to be whatever. If that were to happen, that would be okay. But I'm not status seeking when I do it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But in certain contexts, people will notice those things more. When I was a model, I happened to be 6'1", 160 pounds at the time. And I was able to model for JCPenney's, and people were, oh, you're a model. And it was nothing. It was no big deal. It was a big deal to me because I was waiting tables and bartending, and I didn't want to do that. And it was hard work. And so I would get paid to go and model. And so it elevated that for a little bit, but it was just nothing. But it felt like, oh, I'm going in the right direction because people are like, oh, you're doing this thing. Yeah, I'm standing in front of it. It's no big deal, but it was a perception. And so when people perceive something, they perceive you as something, and then they act accordingly based upon that perception. If you're someone who's very aware of your emotions and your heart and you have a lot of empathy, you're not going to look down on someone because they're of a so-called lesser status than you. You're going to still be just as loving and magnanimous toward them as you would be anyone else. But I don't think that everybody is always prepared to do that, especially in the context of we're actors, we're trying to be actors, we're trying to do this thing, or we're trying to be this, or we're trying to be that. And it becomes a little self-focused. And you sometimes lose sight of, oh, these other people over there, they don't matter that much. Oh, look, maybe they do. Maybe they do matter a little bit. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's fascinating. It's something I've thought about a lot.
Yeah.
It's weird. I mean, we were interacting with each other for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then just one day, the whole dynamic changed. Yep. And I think this must happen a lot. I mean, I'm not naive at all about this. It's human nature, whatever. The other thing I thought was interesting, or one of the other things I thought was interesting in your book, was that you do talk about kind of local people of status as opposed to, celebrities we might see on TV, which we can talk about a little bit more in a bit. But in terms of like the clergy person or the mayor or whatever it might be, I can only imagine, even from personal experience, not even having to imagine, but like when you are in that role, there are people in the community who want to latch onto you because then they're perceived as being the friend of the the top lawyer or whatever it might be. And right. Then when you are not in that status anymore, they probably ditch you, right? Like there's no reason to care about this quote unquote celebrity anymore.
Right. You're not necessarily trying to have access to someone who is no longer has that stature. Yeah. I talk about microfame in the book. I think that's what you're talking about. And I think it's a really important element of, it's probably how fame kind of evolved because we evolved in smaller villages, bands, and tribes thousands of years ago, for millennia. And so having a higher status person nearby, that has its benefits. The hunter who can bring home the most food is a very, very important part of his environment. Literally, like your longevity and health and eating dinner that night may, depend upon it. So I think that there's a lot of ways of looking at how this is all kind of tied together. It's Yeah, I've lost my train of thought a little bit.
Yeah,
But
no, I hear you. So, I do want to open it up to questions and answers in a bit, but just a few other ruminations, musings, my own, based on yours. You bring up so many wonderful anecdotes and little vignettes in the book. One of the things I find fascinating is the celebrity impersonator phenomenon. You mentioned that your father was
yes,
a pretty accomplished Elvis impersonator, and
yes.
the idea of like getting secondhand celebrity status and secondhand like jollies from meeting an impersonator. If you can explain what
Yeah.
that's all about.
Yeah, I talk about it in the form of in anthropology, we talk a lot about contagious magic. And so, and this contagious magic can happen with an actual celebrity or person or whatever. But this, you can generate the same endorphins and feelings of, oh my God, I'm close to this person from people who are imitating that person. And so that's something I may want to expand on more a little bit because I find it really fascinating. And so, and I think this ties into a lot to cosplay and things like that. So where you yourself want to feel closer to the person, and if your impersonation is halfway decent, other people want to be closer to you. I know I have experienced that when I go to Star Wars Celebration and you see a tall guy who's dressed up in a really good Darth Vader costume. I know that's not the guy who played Darth Vader. One thing, he's passed away, but I want to go and take a picture with this guy or a stormtrooper or Boba Fett or whoever it is. I want to, all right, that's R2D2. It's not the original R2D2. I don't care. It looks like R2D2. Want to go and whatever. And so there's, you get the same kind of feeling from that, knowing that it's not the actual person. It doesn't really matter. This goes back to kids dressing up for Halloween. You just want to be closer to that person. So yeah, the idea of, I think it benefits the person who's doing it if they feel that that's how they want to present themselves to the world. It's a sort of attention seeking behavior, not necessarily negative or self-absorbed. It's just something that brings you, uh, I don't know if you all, I can't remember if I brought this up last time. Fran Lebowitz, Pretend It's a City on Netflix. It is so good. She talks about, if it's fun, it's fun. You don't have to have an excuse to why something is fun. If something's fun, she's like, I get it. It's fun. You want to do that because it's fun. And I think that there's value in that for us. You want to do something because it's fun and it generates an excitement. It's like I talk about drag shows and things like that. Someone's dressing up like someone and they're drawing attention to themselves and they're in full regalia, whatever, to present themselves in a certain way. It's eye catching. It catches people's attention. And we like to all focus on another individual doing something like that. That's why we go to stand-up comedy and all these different entertainment venues where you can kind of be closer to the person. I remember going to a play years ago with my sister when she was in town, and these were unknown actors who over on Santa Monica Boulevard in a little tiny playhouse. But it was really nice to meet them afterwards. After you watch them perform for 3 hours, it's like you want to meet them. So that's a little bit of the wanting to be close to them. With the Elvis thing, like Elvis giving out scars like he used to do, then you have a piece that's contagious magic. You have an actual possession. I talk about Molly Ringwald and sharing a cigarette with her. I'm not a smoker, but Molly Ringwald gave me a cigarette, so I have an actual possession of hers. That's a form of contagious magic. Even though it's just, I can't smoke. I have asthma. It's just, I would never do that with anybody else. It's ridiculous. But it's Molly Ringwald, and I'm like, I'm gonna do whatever she's doing right now. I'm glad she wasn't doing anything worse than that. I'd like to think I'm not that, following someone right off a cliff, but I was 28, so.
Yeah. Well, and that's really interesting because we have all those collectors who, you know, collect ordinary household objects that belong to famous people.
Yes,
Like, I don't know how much Abraham Lincoln's toothbrush is worth, but I'm sure it's astronomical. But
yes,
it's
that's
just a
contagious
toothbrush.
magic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
It's
as a collector
fascinating.
myself, I guess I would have to reflect on my own
Like even
collection.
if you have something that your grandmother owned or something,
Oh,
so
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that's connected to that person forever in our minds, and
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
think has benefits to it. It makes you feel included, and it makes you feel a sense of belonging, and I like it. I think it's good.
Right. I think there's a lot of positive that comes from this if
Yeah,
you don't take it too far or
if you
too
don't, yeah,
seriously and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think this is all kind of chemical reward mechanism stuff, right? So
I think
maybe
so.
it's the endorphins and whatever else you get from whatever these fleeting contexts are. I like thinking about my own encounters in Los Angeles of the celebrity who's just walking down the street and I notice them, or I see them in a shop and I'll never forget it, even though it's just an ordinary shopping experience. It's seared in our minds whether we really think of ourselves as so celebrity obsessed or not. It's just something we can't shake. Maybe we're embarrassed, as I often am, to even remember that I saw
I
this
know.
person, you know?
Yeah, I write about the two. I'm like, why do I remember that? Why do I remember that I nearly hit Richard Chamberlain with my car because he walked in front of me? I don't need to remember that. If it were another person, I might not remember. But I'm like, but I think that, we've evolved to be so in tune to facial images, and being able to recognize faces is a big primate thing, right? And so when we see someone who in our mind has put them in a certain category because we've seen them on television or in film our whole lives, so their image is etched into our minds. And because of that, when you see them, it just goes into a different place in your long-term memory, and it kind of shouldn't, but it just does because of who they are. It would be this. It's the same. Sometimes, if you see someone that you just known your whole life, you might, unless you don't see them ever again or you don't see them often, it just lights up a recognition center. And then if it's a person who is perceived to be of higher status, that other people in the world all know who that person is, it rings a bunch of different bells at once. I'm not a brain person, so I don't know what all those centers of the brain are, but I think that is, I don't know if it's a universal phenomenon, but it certainly is a Western phenomenon. My guess is that it has homologies regardless, going back forever.
Right. Yeah, I had this weird experience the other day, just driving my car and listening to NPR, and they were talking about a documentary that's coming out or came out about the automat, which is something back in New York. I'm not intimately familiar with it, but basically in the old days, you could go and get a good meal. Just you like put some money in a slot, and somebody on the other side would give you a nice hot meal. And it was this cultural phenomenon that united people of different classes and different backgrounds. And all these celebrities are interviewed in that movie. It looks really interesting. But
Yes.
along with that, Mel Brooks actually sang an original song because he was one of those who was intimately familiar with the automat experience. And just hearing his voice singing on the radio, I started to tear up.
Yeah.
Like I know him, like he has been a part of my life since the beginning. I saw Spaceballs long before I ever saw Star Wars. Like I think a lot of my own sensibilities and um, just view of life comes from Mel Brooks. Even though I've never met him, I'll probably never
Right.
meet him. He's getting old, et cetera, et cetera. But there was something really deeply personal about listening to him sing his automat song on the radio the other day. So I think you do talk about this a bit in your book as well, because you have a similar relationship with Carrie Fisher
Right.
of blessed memory. And what is that all about? I mean, I think all of us can relate to that kind of connection to a certain celebrity or a certain public figure.
Right. I think that it's really important, and I think it's a net positive overall. And I think Mel Brooks is a great example. He's done, his career is so many decades long. He's either 95 or 90.
Yeah.
He's Yeah, like Norman Lear's like 99. He's going to be 100. This is amazing that where people are living this long. I love it. Yeah, so that is the kind of thing that I do as well. If a certain person who is very beloved, and I think it's very much tied to childhood. If it's someone that you've known from childhood, it will bring tears to your eyes under certain. That's why we love music so much. Music's very tied in with memory, and you can't even extricate it. It's linked there so beautifully, I think, to the point that I'm sure that people who experience dementia are often revived, and or at least temporarily, when they hear music. They never forget the words of songs from their youth. For me, I think Carrie Fisher is an interesting kind of a, I don't even know what the word I would use to describe her in my life. She was funny. But she also, and brilliant. she also was in a movie that came out when I was 6 years old that just seared itself into my whole life. I had kind of a challenging childhood, and so I really kind of latched on to Luke and Leia and that whole thing. It really helped me to get through my childhood, and so her loss felt very personal to me in that way. But what I think is so interesting about that, it's not because Carrie Fisher was a saint. She had a lot of challenges. She was very challenged by, she had mental health challenges. She had drug and alcohol challenges. Not that that means that she shouldn't be looked up to, but it's not like I was trying to put her in a position of being some sort of perfect saint. It's just that she occupies that space for me. And that's and a lot of us, for my dad, it's Elvis. Elvis occupies that space for him, and Mel Brooks may be that for you. And it can be more than one person, but I think that that's really important. It grounds us in it, and I think that one of the biggest positives of people who are of high stature, celebrity status, is that they give us that kind of proxy that we feel like we need. It really does. And I talk about this. It fulfills an emotional need. You're fulfilling a need that we all have by having these people. We don't It probably wouldn't even be great if we necessarily met them. I think I talked about a couple of celebrities that I was in their vicinity, and I'm like, I'm a little kind of disappointed. I still love who that person is. I'm always very careful when I'm talking in Hollywood because somebody's gonna be like, I know that person. So,
Yeah.
but this has happened to me before where they're like, oh, I didn't really think that was so great. They're like, I know her. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. But yeah, so I think that it's really important that we have those people. And let's say if you're not a person who's interested in television or film at all, which is hard to be in the past 80 years, I think that those people can exist in your real life. And I think that that can be even richer, I'm sure. And we have people in our actual lives that represent that. But like, I love my daughter more than anything in the world. I love being a dad more than anything. It is the most fulfilling thing I have ever done, is to be a parent. But that's a very real daily experience, being a parent and being a part of a family and having, and being a son or whatever. All of that stuff is very tied into our daily experience. So that's a very integral kind of love that we have for our family and the people closest to us, our spouse or whatever. With a person of higher status that's like a Carrie Fisher or whomever it is for you, they're almost in this other realm. And I think that's kind of a good thing, that they're in this other space. We can kind of mythologize them a little bit. I mean, Carrie Fisher was Princess Leia, and I talked about this in the book. She's like, I'm her and she's me, and that's what you get, But I like that because she kind of represents this reality of who she was as a person, all the good and bad qualities, and then this mythic figure of a war-torn princess who was not, a damsel in distress, but she was tough and whatever. And I like that mix. I think that just, for whatever reason, that touches me and it makes me happy. And I was really sad when she passed away. Some people are devastated by Prince or David Bowie or Michael Jackson or whomever. When you lose somebody like that, it we're like, oh, that person's gone.
Right.
So
Betty
feeling,
White, recently Betty White's passing,
yeah,
even though
exactly.
it was, inevitable someone that age would
Sure.
pass sooner or later, I think a lot of people were really devastated because she had been in their lives for so long. And even having a resurgence later in her career, later in her life, being in the public eye again. I mean, really remarkable. I think there's something that where you grow up with a particular individual, Carrie
Yeah.
Fisher, Mel Brooks, whatever,
Betty
and
White.
you get to see them through all of these struggles and successes and failures, and you kind of live with them through it in a way.
Right.
I think that can be really powerful. And I had this experience just the other day watching Star Trek 6. I'm a Star Trek and Star Wars fan. I know there aren't that many of us who
Star Trek's
cross the
amazing.
divide in that
No, I'm with you.
way.
I support you.
But like watching Star Trek 6, which came out, you know, decades ago now, but as I'm getting a little bit older, I know I look very youthful, and thank you very much. But watching like the this is their final movie as a crew. They're
Yeah.
all very, you know, aged by
Hmm.
that point. They look weathered,
Yeah.
and there was something just really emotional about seeing them. Most
Yes.
of them are not with us anymore. Um, I shouldn't say most, about half. But the point is that like there's something really remarkable about aging with celebrities in that
Yes.
way. And there's
Absolutely.
something I think positive about that. And I think we might dismiss it, if we're being, if we think it's not a serious thing. But to me, pop culture is culture, you
Yes.
know, and I think Japan, much more than America, embraces that reality, and
Yes. Fully.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but it is the reality, and I think just when you look at fandom and with sometimes our ability to separate the artist from the art, sometimes our ability to not do so, or whatever, our inability to do so, with like J.K. Rowling, however you pronounce it, and Harry Potter, and all of the controversies, some ardent defenders, some ardent detractors. For some people, she's such a disappointment that her work then becomes a disappointment too. You can't separate the two thing.
Right.
It's all very, I know I'm rambling, but it's all very
No,
interesting to me.
I will tell you, particularly with J.K. Rowling, I think that's fascinating because I'm a teacher and I teach different grades here in Burbank, and I was a teacher for many years. Moved here, I became a behaviorist, working with kids on the spectrum, and now I'm teaching again. And this comes up in classrooms with middle school kids. A girl just as recently as maybe 2 weeks ago, probably seventh grade, she's like, I love J.K. Rowling and I love the Harry Potter books so much. She's like, but it's really hard for me because I don't agree with her stance on trans people. And I said, I don't either. I said, this is really, there's only so far I'm going to get into a conversation with a 13-year-old at school because that's not, I'm not able to go down that path fully. But I really appreciated and respected the fact that it meant something to her. She's like, I love this, but I don't love how she is about this other issue. But she's like, but she's so creative, and what she did was so transformative, and we've all grown up with Harry Potter. But at the same time, then she's like she has words that I find very, that exclude a group of people that mean a lot to me. So yeah, I think that is really important. How do you separate those two things? For so many, we could go on and on about authors and singers and all kinds of people who present these kinds of challenges where you still, you're like, oh, I love the work, but the person has these ideas that don't resonate with me or I feel like are, not correct. It kind of matters. It makes you think about it because if it's somebody that you love, the fact that you love their work is a reflection of you. It's a reflection of your interests and your desires and what you like to do with your spare time. Are you going to a concert? Are you reading a Harry Potter book? These are, so it creates a cognitive dissonance that kind of makes you stop and go, whoa, I put this person here and now I don't know where to put them. Can I just take part of them out? Or is what they did so egregious I have to get rid of and it feels like a breakup of sorts, if you decide that you can no longer
Yeah.
support this person's stance, that's a tough position to take if it's someone whose work that you have loved and admired for years.
Yeah, I think, for some people who look at it deeply, they'll start finding some of those views that are abhorrent in the work itself, like
Yeah,
coming out in subtle ways in the subtext or whatever. I mean,
sure.
for me, not really being raised on Harry Potter, it kind of escaped me. I think I was in college when all that stuff was going on.
Same.
But with Roald Dahl, it's a really challenging subject because he died in 1990, and I think part of the allowances given to his work and the properties made on those works, and all the films and everything else. I think he's been gone for a long time, so he didn't have the ability to tweet or do any of that stuff. He was
Right.
on record admitting that he was an anti-Semite, like proud of it.
Right.
And England refused to issue a stamp with him on it because of that, because of the known anti-Semitism and other views. He was racist and everything else. And I can totally see those themes and those feelings really in his books. Yet, there's some of my favorite books and movies, and it's a real, and I, expose my kids to that stuff too.
Right.
I don't know. He's a really troubling case for me because I know that much of what keeps me interested and engaged and even apologetic is that I grew up with that stuff. And if
Right.
I didn't, I wouldn't have the same feelings because I didn't grow up with Harry Potter. So that whole debate is kind of
Right.
interesting to me, but it's not my problem. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. 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 It does create quite a challenge. How do you, especially with something like anti-Semitism, I don't know how you can rectify certain things like that. It's very difficult. I think the the positive element of that, if there is one, is that when someone has a problematic stance, and say I'm talking to a student or I'm talking to my own daughter, let's talk about what their position was and what they said, and let's enlighten ourselves as best as we can about how that is a dangerous position to have, and how that person was wrong for taking that position, and it's not okay. And maybe we can still acknowledge that their art had value, um, instead of throwing it all out. I think this is one of the most timely things that we have going on right now, in light of the Me Too movement and everything. How do we incorporate, it's hard for me, like with Bill Cosby, I'm out, it's just too much. And I can't speak for anybody else or how they feel about it, but there are lines that get crossed and I'm like, yeah, I'm out. It's not easy to do. But it does, like I said, if you can make it. I chose with this kid to have a very quick 30-second discussion because I could see that it meant something to her, that she was hurt by J.K. Rowling's stance in this. And I said, I want you to know I hear you and I agree with you. I don't agree with it either. It's a really timely discussion, and I appreciate you bringing it up and standing up for people who are different and have a different whatever. And that was that. And I think she felt listened to, but she didn't know yet. She still didn't know. And I was like, sometimes sometimes I'm conflicted too. I get it. So yeah, it's a tough one, but it does matter.
Yeah, I think you're reminding me of a or bringing up for me a very interesting thought to me. It's my thought, so I think it's interesting. But um, with J.K. Rowling or Roald Dahl, because they're removed from their work in a sense, they're not the product. It is Harry Potter or James and the Giant Peach or whatever, and you're experiencing that and creating images in your mind or watching a secondhand version through a film, maybe it's a little bit easier to
Right.
separate the two. But with Bill Cosby, who had the Cosby Show, and I saw him do stand up, and I watched the Cosby Show every week, and I cannot watch it anymore. You
Yeah,
know,
I can't either.
um, I wonder if there must be a difference there where it's the person who you're seeing versus the person's product. I have a book on my shelf about Richard Wagner, who's obviously a problematic romantic composer, and the title of the book is like The Terrible Man and the Beautiful Art or something like that.
Right.
I think it's easier to make that separation if it's not Wagner who we're experiencing, it's his music, right?
Exactly. And this is why, if you have not seen Fran Lebowitz Pretend It's a City on Netflix, she talks about this as well. It's Martin Scorsese did the whole thing, and they're like best friends, and he's in it a lot with her. And she talks about separating the art from the artist, and she doesn't have a problem with that. And she's like, she was like, I'm still going to read this person's books, even though they took some positions that I find abhorrent. The book is still good, and I'm still going to read it, and that's how I feel about it. So it almost to me is a kind of a case by case basis. I think it just depends. I think sometimes it's good when we stop and reflect on why we can or cannot tolerate something. I don't think it necessarily means that we're okay with this person's stance on something just because we value their art. So it's and sometimes I don't know. I think that it's possible that if some of these people were still alive, or I'm not trying to be an apologist for anybody's horrible ideas, that sometimes people's perceptions evolve over time, and they would never, and I can't even believe I thought that. That's so ridiculous that I even would say that out loud. So I do think that there can be room for redemption for some people under certain circumstances, but it becomes a very case by case thing. Um, if anything, it just gives us an opportunity to discuss these issues that are important in our culture, and why those types of perceptions are harmful to other people, without necessarily saying that, even like I said, you may want to never have anything to do with them again or their work. I have trouble with Michael Jackson. I just, it's, and that's so hard to say. And it's always I always feel kind of like, oh, I don't know. But he was such a huge part of American culture for so many years. But I'm a little bit like, yeah, that seems really peculiar to me. And just as a parent, and even before I was a parent, but man, his work was amazing, so it's tough. It's tough. It's like, but okay, yeah, the work is amazing, but if this
Yeah.
other stuff really happened, there's like no worse thing that you can do. So it's just tough.
It's hard. And, with Michael Jackson personally, I love listening to the Jackson 5, the innocent young, we know
Yeah,
the troubled upbringing that he had and everything else, and we're kind of pulling for him at that point.
yeah,
And then later stuff is a little more challenging, like
yeah,
the after knowing what he was, accused of, etc., later in life.
yeah. It's tough.
I can kind of make a separation even between his earlier work and his later work, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, I talk in the book about harassment and things of that nature, and how that affects people's perceptions, how the person is perceived if they accuse someone of harassment, or if they're accused of harassment. I think in the case I talk about is Pamela Anderson, is where I spent the most time on that. Her particular position on it versus who I saw her to be as a person, going to her home several times as a caterer. Nothing, I wasn't as an invited guest. I was invited to cook and clean up. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of interesting discussions going on right now about how we listen to people who claim that something has happened to them, and versus the status of the person who, if the accused person is someone that is well known.
Mhm.
How do we there's a whole show about it on Showtime now about Bill Cosby, for example. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And I never feel like the position I take needs to be somebody else's position on that. I mean, there's no way we're going to get full consensus on. It's like you said, there's a cutoff with the Jackson 5 to Michael Jackson. So that makes sense to me. But but it's just weird. How do we sort it out?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and I think it's a good sign, if people are going through those kinds of calculations and thinking about these things deeply, as you mentioned. I think that just shows a mature um, level of engagement with popular culture that isn't just a knee-jerk kind of thing. I think what is challenging for a lot of people is when they do put someone on a pedestal, and then they have this cognitive dissonance when they learn about something, and they just can't handle any of that.
right, yeah, and that's the danger of, we need to be aware that whoever it is that we admire and adore for whatever it is that they've done, they everybody's a flawed person, and some are have more flaws than others. And yeah, it's sorting that out. um for me, if it's somebody that I really like Carrie Fisher, for example, obviously aware of her struggles and dying at 60 years old, basically because she took terrible care of herself, um, is contributed to her early death. But I'm kind of aware, and I embrace the fact that it's a little bit of the childhood mythology mixed in for me as well. So I don't have any judgment about her choices and her mental health struggles and her addiction. There's no judgment there for me. Of course, that's more self-directed. She wasn't doing anything harmful to anyone else. Maybe there were times that she wasn't being a stellar parent, but yeah, I can suspend any judgment because she doesn't have that problematic past. But for some of us, when we find out that somebody does, then it's really tough. But for the most part, I wanted the book to be mostly positive, more conversational. I had a reviewer who didn't like that I used sometimes me instead of I. I'm like, well, I did that in purpose because I don't want it to sound. I wanted it to sound conversational. I was aware of that, but so I wasn't trying to make it clinical or removed from the reader. I wanted it to just be, these are my experiences that contributed to the path that I went down, and also pepper it in with some anthropological concepts and thoughts, and even and some psychological terms and things like that, and just kind of put it together in a short volume that maybe I could expand on later or do another volume. It's so funny that for this particular book, after I wrote all of this and I got it the way I wanted it and I was ready to set it up and I published it and got it out there, it felt like I kind of ticked off a box psychologically for myself. I'm not even that interested in some of the chapters anymore. I don't know how to describe that. I'm like, I described it. I said what I wanted to say. I included some friendships in there, some people who I think are representative of that particular of micro fame or whatever it is. And now I just kind of feel like, oh, I guess I just really needed to get that off of my mind.
Yeah.
And now I'm just kind of like, oh, it's not like I don't even know if I'm as interested in that topic anymore as I was. With chimps, I definitely am. But some of this is just like, oh, this is stuff that the chimpanzee book encapsulates a lot of my 30s. This book is my 20s and my 40s. It kind of bookends it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And after I wrote all that down and kind of sorted out what I wanted to say about those run-ins with celebrities and my transition from a model to being an anthropologist and how I use the lens differently now, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, well, that was that. It's like I'm ready to move on to, some other kind of topic that may or may not be directly linked to that.
I feel the same way as an author myself. When I'm done writing something, that's kind of it for me. And
Yeah.
then, I can relate. I mean, when I get interviewed or invited to talk about a book that I wrote, even at last year, it's very removed from where I am now. I think, any writing project is very momentary. It's you're writing down who you are at that moment or what you think at that moment. And, there's no guarantee of consistency or anything like that.
Yeah. I wasn't
So,
expecting to
yeah,
feel that way. It was
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. I was like, oh, this is yeah, I wrote it down and now I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, one of the things you brought up as well is, in addition to what you mentioned earlier about anthropologists not really thinking of ethno autobiography or whatever you called it,
Yeah. Auto ethnography.
autoethnography as a thing. You also talk about how anthropologists typically focus on the ordinary people or the marginalized, even, or people in remote areas, and
Right.
trying to bring them to light. And you're kind of taking the opposite approach, where you're focusing on the people who we know, the household names, etc.
Right.
Do you see that as any kind of a trend in anthropology, or something that is taken a little more seriously now?
I don't know because I feel a little bit removed from the academic part of anthropology. When I got my graduate degree in anthropology, I focused on culture because so many departments are so culture focused, and I just also included my primate work in there. Some of them didn't like that, and I did it anyway. I think that it should be because I think that, as you were saying, pop culture is culture. I'm tempted to steal that and give you credit for it, but it's. I think that it really kind of speaks to a lot of what that is. So what is happening with the Kardashians does affect how we dress and look and behave and whatever, and what we decide to post on social media and Instagram. It is linked to that because they're at the top. So that, how could that not be anthropology and not be anthropologically relevant? What's going on with the greater entertainment culture or whatever it is, people that we look up to that make billions of dollars and live lifestyles that we never will. So I would like to see more of that. How much has, I didn't do a huge lit review for this since a lot of it was more personal. So I don't know what the trends are. I just remember in graduate school, which has now been 13 years, and I think I mentioned this briefly in the book, that one of the professors was like, we need to look at wealth culture as well. So I took wealth culture and just kind of narrowed it down to celebrity culture, and then included other things that mimic that, like micro fame, like local entertainers and clergy and things like that. I think that it could be a thing if people wanted to explore it more. I don't know. I love that anthropology looks at marginalized communities. I think that's so important. Uh, Sometimes I read an ethnography and I think it's really interesting. Sometimes I find them a little dry. I don't. It just depends. That sometimes information. I don't need to be entertained all the time. It's okay if it's dry. I like that. But and academic. I like that. I'm a nerd like that. So I would like to see if somebody could maybe take it several steps further than what I did, and do something that's uh, more steeped in more traditional anthropology than mine, which was not.
Yeah. You're reminding me of a famous study, the the very famous ethnomusicologist who did the study. I'm going to get the name wrong. I'm going to attribute it to the wrong person, so I'm not going to even say. But basically, he was looking at Native American tribes. Again, I don't even remember the specific area, but basically, with the expectation of going in there and learning about the traditional music that they use for ritual and so on and so forth.
Right.
But then he discovered that everyone on the reservation was listening to country music on the radio, and that was a huge part of their identity also. So he had like this moment where his focus shifted because it wasn't the traditional, generational knowledge and all that kind of stuff. It was essentially pop music that became the focus of that study. So I think you're right. The sense that even people who are the ordinary folk, right, their identities are shaped by celebrities too. And that
Absolutely.
is a big part of culture. It's a big part of who we are. We talked about Carrie Fisher and Mel Brooks, etc. I mean,
Right.
the fact that our identity is not compartmentalized in a way that we're separate from the things that we consume, I think is a really important point, and one that comes through in the book as well. And I think, there is room and uh, I think opportunity to really look at this more deeply and more seriously as, like you quoted me, I'll quote myself, pop culture being culture,
Yeah.
this idea that our identities as modern people are so wrapped up in the
Right.
kinds of things you're talking about.
And we may not even realize it. It's just because we're enculturated that way from a very young age. We all grew up with a giant wooden frame television set, if we're my age or older, that was that was on all the time. And so from the time that before we can even speak, these images are coming to us. And I'm sure you know, you're a little younger than I am, but back in the day, there were like 5 channels, and everybody watched the Tonight Show, and everybody, we watched the same stuff basically. That's why the ratings were really high for certain shows in the 70s and 80s and 60s too. So that shifted and shaped our culture. WandaVision is a really good example of this on Disney. I'm not like a big Marvel person. I'm not a superhero person. I'm more sci-fi. WandaVision is so good because it goes through all of the phases of television from the 1950s to present, and it does it in such a brilliant way. So if you haven't seen WandaVision, if you want, it's not your typical superhero thing at all. It's really good. But I love how they show the importance and the progression, and it's tied to how men and women interact and all these things. And so we grow up seeing this coming to us on a screen in our living room, and it does affect who we are as adults. In addition to going to the movies and seeing movies, of course.
Right.
So yeah, you can't really separate the two. What you were saying about like Native American cultures and how they will incorporate country Western music, I think that could be an interesting ethnography. Look at how different marginalized cultures incorporate things from the larger Western culture and why certain things mean something to them. Why is it country music instead of some other genre, for example? I think that can be really
Yeah.
interesting because if you're just going to boil it down to traditions that maybe are not really a part of their daily life anymore, it's important to do that, especially if a certain cultural behavior or language is dying out. You want to preserve that. It's like urgent anthropology, they call it. We need to get this documented because this culture is disappearing, this language is disappearing, this specific type of dance or ritual, no one knows how to do it anymore except for 3 elders who are elderly and whatever. I think that's very important. But looking at the diversity of cultures and how different cultures interact and influence one another, I think would be a really interesting area for anthropology.
Absolutely. So we're going to open it up to Q&A in just a moment. But Devyn, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
You have maybe a couple sentences to just sum up what the big takeaway is from your writing of the book, what you think um, readers should be interested to find, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for anyone who would be interested in this is when you to just think about what this part of our culture means to you. and why it's important to you. So these specific events in your life that led you to feel a lot of love and appreciation for people who most likely are not in your physical space. So we have created a mental space for people that we hold them in very high regard. So if you ever even catch a glimpse of them, then it means so much. I think there's a real beauty and magic in that. And it enhances our lives. And it's kind of a mix of fantasy and reality. And I love that concept of, this is our chosen person or people or things that make us happy. And then this is the reality of the world and how they kind of come together and form this really beautiful orb of who you are. And we carry that with us throughout our whole lives. I think that's really a beautiful thing.
Thank you. All right. So questions. Yeah, Gina. You're muted.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi, Gina.
Hi. Let me get back to the video. So a couple of things. First of all, you are a multi-talented person, Devyn.
Thank you.
I can't believe how many skills that you've come to the table with, from chef to a model to anthropologist to, it's just pretty amazing. And I attended your lecture on was it the bonobos?
Bonobos?
Yes. I'd never heard of them before. It was so interesting. But I should comment. First of all, I love Gene Wilder.
Yes.
He is my idol. And when he married Gilda Radner, I was so happy.
Love her too.
Nurse practitioner. I work from home. I do what are called good faith evaluations for these little medi spas that provide aesthetic treatments. And it kills me. It kills me when I see 18-year-old girls come in and they want their lips expanded and Botox. They get their lips all Kardashian related.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're just so naive to themselves and to how the culture mandates these kinds of things. And it's very, I can do nothing but, do my job, but it is very unsettling that this is the current culture of some young ladies.
You used a word that I think is so on point, mandated. It feels like it is compulsory for some young people, and it is mandated by the culture. And I think that is unfortunate, as opposed to, understanding that physically trying to make yourself look like someone else, it doesn't, I don't want to judge anybody who ever wants to have any kind of thing done like that. But when you're at such a tender age, it's hard, and it is hard. It's hard for them to think, I need to do this thing in order to feel this way. So I totally agree with you. That's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So, following up on that, I think you do talk about in the book positive celebrities versus maybe this case not being such a positive effect on the culture.
Right.
I mean, obviously we're going to have a mixed bag of celebrities. They're human beings,
sure,
representing different things. Some are like, the fact that Einstein was a major celebrity is kind of amazing, because he was a brain, a brain in a body, basically.
Right.
But we will certainly have a mixed array of different types of celebrities. I was intrigued by some of those who you mentioned who are, positive contributors, those who are very conscious of their status and they give back and they try to be good role models and such. I think there's a lot to be said for such people. I'm just making a comment.
No, yeah, I do. And I think that if Oprah has said this many times for years, she's like, becoming a celebrity, doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. And so if you're a person who has a lot of empathy and understanding and caring about other people in the world, I think that is enhanced when you have a platform to do so, if you choose to do it that way. And there's many, I'm sure we can think of many people who you can, I've never met Mark Hamill, but he is just so positive and just seems so down to earth. And he's another hero of mine. And I'm sure that we can all think of lots of people that, you can see in how they interact with the world that they're bringing their best self. And I think that is I was hoping that my takeaway was, for the most part, I think that this is something that enhances our world, even though we have these other frustrating elements of it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
It's me again.
Okay.
As as a nurse, I worked labor and delivery, and I did per diem work at St. John's, which at the time was kind of a hoo-ha place to have a baby for the celebrities. So I remember taking care of somebody. I have no idea who she was, but apparently she was somebody. And she wouldn't talk directly to me. She spoke to her friend or her significant other to tell the nurse to do. And I was just flummoxed at that type of behavior. Fortunately, I was just relieving somebody for a lunch break, so I didn't have to deal with her. But I was really, why would you do that? I'm a human,
I would be too. I would
Yeah.
be too. And that kind of thing burns itself into your mind as well. You're like, remember when that person was like, for no reason other than just trying to be grand or whatever. I think these days, like more recently, I'm hoping that there's less of a trend towards that of I'm so important that I can't, you need to avoid making eye contact with me and I can't talk to you, because that's just, I mean, you've really bought into your own BS too much. If that's the case, it's like, come on now. And I don't know that people are going to be as receptive to that, but I'm sure that there are people that are that way. And it is a little bit like, I think you're missing an opportunity as someone who's of higher status if you treat people that way. I think it does harm to your own self to make a separation, like, I am some sort of elevated person and I can't talk to people who are helping me or whatever. It's an unfortunate kind of a side effect of what celebrity can do to some people, where they're, again, maybe they had these ideas about themselves before they became famous. I don't know, but it's frustrating. And I would, in the same way I remember the really cool, good, fun stuff that happens, I also am like, oh, I remember when I ran into so-and-so and I was like, oh, wow. And what I didn't want the book to be, because I've lived here on and off for so many years, I didn't want it to just be a name drop book. If I included somebody in there, I was trying to have a reason as to why I put them in the book. But I have lots of stories too where I'm like, ouch, that was like, you're acting like that in public. People can see you treating people like that. It's frustrating. And then there's other times where like, I saw so-and-so, they were so nice to me, made my day. I'll never forget it. I think I mentioned that with Lily Tomlin. I mean, she just, her saying hi to me. I'm like, I've had a conversation with Lily Tomlin. She said hi, and it was like 2 seconds. But she's amazing, and that's awesome. So it can definitely. I mean, they're just people, but we remember because of their status. We remember those things, and it makes you feel a certain way. It's so easy to make somebody feel good, isn't it? I mean, it's really, making people feel seen, and just, it's not that hard. I don't know why people haven't figured that out yet. Some people, it's like, just be present and, have a conversation, or don't. Even just making people feel like you see them is
Right,
so
right.
important.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just going to bring up an example from my own life, not because it's about me, but again, it sort of confirms, Gina, what you were saying. I think for people maybe like Gina and me, we're just ordinary people doing our jobs, and we don't expect, grandiose treatment or to be given the cold shoulder. We're just humans. We want human interactions, So I was the cantor for a bar mitzvah of the son of a late, very wealthy Jewish guy in Las Vegas. If you know who I'm talking about, maybe you know who I'm talking about. But um, I hadn't met him before this grand event that he was putting on. And I was brought into his office at the campus that was named after him, where the bar mitzvah was taking place, and he had his handlers like standing in like two flanks on the side of the room. I walked in between them. He handed one of them a check, and then it got handed to the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and that person handed it to me. And that was the extent of our, I mean, it was so like comical,
Right.
like from a movie, like this actually happens. It was so weird, you know.
Yeah,
I couldn't, to this day, I mean, I find it very humorous,
yeah,
but
it's
like,
almost just silly.
yeah,
I'm sure I know who you're talking about, and I have just sometimes seen things that I'm like, ouch. And he is from that old school, or was. I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about. And yeah, it is just, it borders on the ridiculous. It's like, and I think I didn't write about that this much in this book, but it certainly is interesting. If you're that kind of person, you have the ability and the money or whatever, you will find other people to allow you to be that way, and that just confirms in your world that that's the way it's supposed to be. So because you've got other people, if you pay them, if they're an employee or whatever, you may not even have to pay them much. Some people want to be in the proximity of legends or whomever so much that they're willing to put up with ridiculous behavior, and no one's ever going to turn to her or him and say, you're really being a jerk and this is so unnecessary, and you look ridiculous behaving as though you're a king. And yeah, it is. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that you're like, oh wow,
so
really?
let's think about that for a second. The people who put themselves in the position to be an employee or an associate of that kind of person, there must be a anthropological, primatological explanation for that also, to explain why those people exist in this ecosystem, right?
Yeah, I think there could be an anthropological explanation. I think there could be lots of different reasons why people are people pleasing behavior, where you are deriving your sense of self-worth from trying to get a few crumbs from someone who is in a position above you, and for whatever, or to be in close proximity to them, that gives you a feeling of self-worth, to be near that person, to be able to say, you know what, I work for so and so. And I do mention in the book, and I mention it as hearsay, so I've tried to make that clear, about a very famous singer who I just decided, I'm not even going to go to this person's house because everybody's telling me that she treats their staff terribly. I wish I had gone. But yeah, I think if you are willing to tolerate any environment where someone is challenged to work for, has a really quirky, intense personality, I think that says something in and of itself right there about
Yeah.
certain types of people. Maybe it's not necessarily a conscious thing, but you might be like, oh, I'm willing to put myself in a position where I have a difficult employer, but the person is of higher status, and so it means something to me for that reason. So
Right. And let alone somebody who marries that person, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Then you're really in. If you're married to the person, and if the person takes advantage of who they are in the eye of the public, then I think that can be unfortunate to be in that close proximity, because no one tells. Sometimes people don't tell these people. They want yes men. They don't want anybody to tell them no, or that you're being ridiculous. That you're out if you do that. That's black and white thinking. I'm very wary of binary thinking where everything is one way or the other. A lot of times the truth is in the gray area, So,
Sure.
I mean, certain things are absolute, but certain things are like, okay, yeah, you don't have to be a tyrant just because you're in a specific position. I don't care what it is.
Mhm.
That's true.
Yeah.
Ellen, I see you there. Hi.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the way you're talking about the reaction, especially of men, to not having as much fame or having declining fame, and thinking of terms of, this is a sort of an annoying and controversial subject, but cancel culture, or whatever people call cancel, and
Very timely.
certain celebrities that just get so extremely pissed when people are like, contradicting them or telling them that they're wrong.
Yeah.
The point where they maybe film an entire hour special where all they do is talk about it.
Yeah, it can be very narcissistic, and there might be a slightly higher percentage of narcissism in Hollywood than other places. I don't know how to measure that. I don't know if I'd want to, but yeah, it's a little bit like, you're contradicting me. Don't you know that I'm a person who is visible in the world? And yeah, so and the whole cancel culture thing in general, I think, is a really interesting and timely topic, because it delves into politics and perception and legitimate things that people should be canceled for, and faux pas that we're going to cancel them because they just made a slight misstep. I don't know. It really, you could write a huge, I think, really, I don't know. I don't think I have the talent to do it, but I think the cancel culture thing is so timely right now. And yeah, but a lot of it is, the reactions of people who are like, should I be questioned because I'm well known? So why am I being questioned? That is definitely a thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just about, oh, I don't know. This is a big thing with comedians too, especially. Oh, like, I'm just funny. Like, you don't get my joke. And
I know. Yeah, that is so true. Dave Chappelle comes to mind. He is of a similar position as J.K. Rowling when it comes to trans issues. Yeah, it's like, that's not funny to me. I've watched some of the shows and I've just cringed. I thought, if my closest friend is trans, I'm like, if she were here with me and she saw that, I would be. There's just no way. But it's like, oh well, I'm just being funny. And the guy is really talented and he's very funny. But some things I'm like, does that need to be funny? I don't know. And then I remember 30 years ago, Andrew Dice Clay had a stand-up routine that all my guy friends were listening to, and it was misogynistic, racist, homophobic, everything. It was really, really bad. But everybody thought it was funny, and so he got really famous from that style of stand-up comedy. And there was no ambiguity, even for 1990. It was tough. And he seems to have been forgiven from that many years later. He did a movie recently with, I think, Lady Gaga and all that. So I'm not saying he's irredeemable, but it's a different time now and we have more awareness of that. But comedians, I think that's a really interesting topic, because it's like, how do you be funny and edgy? Sarah Silverman's talked about this. She's like, I've said stuff before that I wouldn't say that now. She's like, and I don't feel that way now, but at the time I thought it was funny. And she's like, it's okay. Joan Rivers was like, I'm not apologizing for anything. Sarah Silverman's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Sorry I said that. I think there's power in that, to be able to go, yeah, I was trying to be funny. I mean, I'm sure we've all tried to be funny sometimes when we said something that we're like, I think I missed the mark with my humor there. I might have. Funny is not supposed to be, hurtful to a group of people.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a great point.
right. Well, I just think of, in terms of Dave Chappelle, especially, he seems to be especially irritated that people are telling him
Yeah.
that he's wrong about this group of people who is
Right. Yeah, he doesn't like being told that it's not okay to say that. That he's almost more upset about that, you're right, than he is that he even said it.
like, I mean, in terms of, like, I'm Dave Chappelle, I'm the man who speaks up for like the oppressed, and you're telling me that I'm
Right.
this is what I'm known for.
Right. Yeah. He's like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't really, at
Well,
least that I know of so far, he doesn't seem to really get that. And
I think the problem with him and JK and probably some others who are quote unquote canceled, although, there's an argument to be made that rich people, famous people can't get canceled. I mean, it's like
they come back
a
around.
complete farce.
Yeah.
But that being said, it's the doubling down. It's the lack of awareness, and the, not only am I not sorry about having these views, but I'm going to have them more. I'm going to have
Right.
more of these views. That's where it gets really difficult. I think someone like Whoopi Goldberg, who got into some hot water recently, seems to be very, very apologetic.
Yes.
Kind of talking out of her depths on a particular subject, and she was schooled on it. And
yeah,
I think
receptive.
That's a human growth thing that we expect.
Right.
And when we don't see it with Dave Chappelle and some of these other people, that's where it really is like their true colors. They're just not, maybe they're not decent people after all, or something like that,
Yeah, maybe not, because I sometimes when a celebrity says something and it gets a lot of airtime for whatever reason, I sometimes think, okay, you've said something awful. And now you're going to double down on it. And I'm like, are you a clinician? Are you a psychologist? Did you go to college to learn about this topic? Do you have friends who are from this community? What area of expertise are you speaking from? Because it's just like, you don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's a big challenge I have with it is, okay, you're a comedian, funny, brilliant person. Like some of the material I think is really great. Or a writer, you're obviously a very successful writer, you write these books, but you're not an expert on this issue and you really don't know anything about it at all. You've just decided, because we're in America and we're all experts on everything, you've decided that you know where this is and what this is. I'm like, why am I even listening to you? It's like, this is not your area.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not telling you how to be a comedian or how to be, you know, a world famous author. I don't know how to, I don't know that. That's not my thing.
Right. And, you know, and I'm just thinking about it in terms of their sense of, you know, they feel like it's a threat to their status. So, you know, they're reacting on that. Like,
right. Yeah.
You know, like a primate might if he was
Absolutely.
taken down.
Yeah. Doubling down is very much a primate thing. You're right, Ellen. I think that's a good point. It's like, this is, you know, I am of a particular status and therefore it's my way or no way. And anyone who comes to me and says, I don't think so, you're immediately wrong. And I'm going to tell you why I'm right. That to me that's a binary way of thinking. Like, I'm right and you're wrong. And that's that. You know, certainly we can talk about lots of different issues pertaining to all different sorts of things in the world and sort out what that means without doubling down on something that you said that, and plus, and I've seen his work and I'm like, that sounds awful to me. That I don't think it sounds funny. I think it sounds awful. And I don't feel like I'm a hypersensitive person. You know, I taught college for 10 years. Students told me all kinds of things. And I talk about this in the first book. I'm like, this is not the time for me to necessarily be offended. And I'm not going to humiliate this person, but we're going to talk about this a little bit more because it does me no good to just say you're wrong. Okay, let's just talk about it a little bit. And a student say, well, why do we even have to have all this terminology? We didn't used to have all this terminology. I said, well, because culture changes and we learn new things about what it means to be human. And so that's okay. And we're going to talk about these areas where, you know, where people who are not included for whatever reason should be more included in the larger culture and not, you know, derided for who they are. And then we can go from there. So we want to clap back in our culture. You said this, I said that. Da, 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 da.
Yeah. I think there's also that phenomenon, you know, among certain celebrities and just people in general, of feeling like you're in a marginalized position, you're historically persecuted, so therefore you can have abhorrent views, but they're not actually racist or homophobic or anything because you are a persecuted person. I know that in the Jewish community there's a lot of racism, but it's not acknowledged as such because, you know, if you're a Jew and you're historically persecuted, then you're kind of given an excuse to have certain views. You know, this is nothing new and nothing controversial, what I'm saying. I mean, it's a reality, but I do know that
yeah,
you can hide under the cover of being a woman or being African American and then, you know, take it from there, right?
Right. Yeah, I see it in my community as well. It's just like things that, you know, that we used to think were funny and they're not funny or whatever. And it's I think the doubling down thing is the hard part. And, you know, just acknowledging areas where we probably should have productive conversations. And I think a lot of it comes down to intention. If somebody has an idea that is limiting or hurtful to a group of people that they perpetuate and make a lot of money off of, particularly, the idea that, you know what, I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where I would say something, well, I'm sorry, I don't care what you think, if I knew that it hurt large groups of people. I mean, I have opinions about how I was raised in a community that I felt was very religiously structured in such a way that it was limiting and homophobic and at times very racist and lots of different things. But I don't like try to go out and attack Christian people because of that, or say, oh, they're all this or they're all that. That would be ridiculous. So, you know, I that's not where I'm going to operate from. And if I said something to offend a group of people for whatever their beliefs are, I would be mortified, for one thing. And I would say, like, you know, I'm carrying a perspective with me that maybe I need to think about or reconsider. But just know that even if I never we're not all going to reach a consensus about a lot of different things. But my intention is never that I would exclude a group of people based on some attribute that they have or some background that they have. And unfortunately, people in higher status get so, just go look at CNN. I'm sure right now, if you scroll down, you'll see something some celebrity said, they tweeted about it. Like, well, who cares? What does that have to do with anything? But because they're a person of higher status, it goes to the top of the page, even though they're just, and they have a job, I have a job, they have a job, but they have more visibility with their job. So they're not necessarily even saying anything bad. Maybe they're saying something lovely, but because of who they are, we all have to stop and take a look. It's interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, even when the things that they're tweeting are not profound in any way, like you said, they're not talking about subjects that they know anything about, but because they're people that we recognize from a TV show, it takes on a different weight in our culture. I wonder though, because I've thought a bit about this. There are a lot of people on this planet, 8 billion or whatever. And is it part of just our need to kind of reduce and create order from such vastness that we kind of focus on just a few people and what they have to say? Is there more to it than just I recognize this person? Is it, well, that person said it and I can say that that person said it and I've now reduced a huge phenomenon into one little container? I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's like very reductive. Yeah, we do want to have order, and there's only so many things that we can hold in our mind at one time. And so it is easy. And we evolved in small bands and groups of people. We didn't evolve with, an awareness even that there's 8 billion people on the planet or whatever. So we do kind of have that evolved mindset of it's a community kind of thing. And some of our community is real, our colleagues and, our kids, friends at school and things that we do on a daily basis. And the rest of it is constructed. And so there's only so many things that you can keep in your head. You find the people who are in general alignment with either your values or whatever you think these things are, or your interest in them because you've been watching them on TV since you were 5. And there's a limit. It's probably, I don't know, 150 or so that we can really just kind of keep up with. And so when they say something, it's impactful to us. We may not think it's I love Cher. Sometimes her texts or tweets, I'm like, I don't even know what she's talking about. I love her, but I don't know what she means. That's okay, because I'm not trying to hold her up to be, that her perspectives are what I need to be, too concerned about, even though I really like her. So yeah, there's only so much we can hold in our head in one time. And it's easy to just let someone else say, yeah, what he said. And I like that person, therefore what he or she said goes. It's kind of a cop out in a way. I think it's a little bit
I think so. Like, it could be the same view that you have, but the fact that, somebody from TV said it makes it important somehow.
Right. Yeah.
And I think
it's a reinforcer.
I think you're getting to something too, which is, we tend to think of smart people as people who basically agree with us, and dumb people or idiots as people who don't agree with us. And we do kind of create that group of 150 or whatever whatever the magic number is.
Yeah.
And so it's just like bouncing the same opinion around, voiced differently in that group.
That's why Facebook has these algorithms that deal directly with that. So it becomes a bit of a constructed echo chamber of sorts.
Right.
Which makes it harder to listen to other perspectives or whatever. And you want to be affirmed. We all want to be affirmed, and we will do, I think, almost anything to be affirmed. We want to be, and we need to be affirmed. We want to be affirmed by our spouses and our children and whatever, our families, our colleagues, our boss. Affirmation is something that really helps us feel grounded and loved and like we're part of the world. But we'll extend that to try to find affirmations from getting Facebook likes or Instagram likes or things like that. But that is so fleeting. It just goes in one end and out the other. I would like to have more, it would be great if I had more reviews and ratings on my books online, but I can't let that interfere with the fact that I wanted to be creative and put some stuff together. And I don't have to attach the value of whatever I think, said, or did to what the world is perceiving it as. but it comes to mind and I check it fairly often. It's like, I say, oh, well, did anybody write something down about something that I said or did? Because if it's something that if they said something positive, I find it affirming. And then I like that. I'm like, oh, somebody got what I was trying to do. If they say something negative, I'm like, oh, maybe they were right. And then I kind of think about I might think about the negative comment way more than the positive comment, because I'm like, oh, even though it doesn't matter, some stranger who I will never meet, but I come from a species who evolved from a socially interactive primates where somebody's perspective in the group really did matter. So
Yeah.
I think we just map a lot of these things
I've
onto.
grown to have a particular opinion of my own work. First of all, I always write things for myself. you know, I,
Yes.
you know, and if it's because I'm interested in learning more about something, that I'll take the time to do that. If somebody happens to read it, it's always a surprise to me. Like, wow, this person actually read it, and then they took the time to write something about it, even if it's
Yeah,
negative.
exactly.
Like, I've impacted somebody's life,
Yeah.
in a way. I mean, I guess this is a coping mechanism, but the idea of just the fact that somebody read it and took the time to write something nasty about it itself is kind of an amazing thing.
It is, and they're entitled to their perspective. It's there's a person who does not like my books, and she's commented on Goodreads, and she's the first person to comment, so it's just sitting right there at the top. And it broke my heart the first time she did it. I think I mentioned it to you in a text. And then she did it again for this book. And I look at it and I read and I'm just analyzing it, and I'm like, well, you know what, she's kind of right. And then the other part, I'm like, well, wait, you didn't write this book, I did. I'm not going to get into your brain and see how you would write the book.
She
And
hates books. Why does she keep reading them?
I got to give her credit. I can tell by her critique that she's read every word. And so I'm like, well, I got to give her credit. She did read every word. She's giving me 3 out of 5 stars, but hey, it's not 1 out of 5. But she doesn't like what I'm bringing to the table. But she comments on it in a very thorough way. And the first book, it hurt my feelings. The second book, it did too, but not for as long. And I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and I don't know, I can't remember her name right now. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. Big author. She wrote a book called
Gilbert?
Yes, 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 yes. She wrote a book a few years ago called Big Magic, and it talks about being creative and putting your work out there into the world, whatever it is. And I just finished reading it about a week ago. It really helped me so much. She's like, it's a paradox. Whenever we bring anything that we're doing to the world, you have to care so much and not care at all. It's like, she's like, it means the world to you, and yet it means nothing. You got to be confident in your creativity in this case, or whatever it is that you're bringing to the world, however you presenting yourself, and know that other people are going to get it and other people are not going to get it, and not let that. The most important thing is that you put the creative work out there, not whether or not it was received and wins a Pulitzer Prize. It's, did you put the work that you intended to put out there to the best of your ability based on what your thoughts and experiences are? And if somebody else doesn't care for it, they have every right to not care for it. They have a whole different set of experiences and backgrounds and beliefs and whatever. So that really helped me a lot. I'm like, yeah, I think that's very true. I have to care. I care so much about it, but then I have to hit publish, and then I don't have to care anymore. It's my choice.
And
So,
and so we have a system at work. It's kind of an affirmation points thingy that you can send points to Darren and say, oh, he did such a good job today, and he gets 10 points. And I'm always thinking, well, what am I, chopped liver? It's like I'm doing a good job, and you become inured to these things, that getting 10 points or 15 points doesn't really mean anything, but it means a lot. As I'm hanging up from a phone call I'm having with a patient, and I hear in the background, oh, she's so nice. That means something to me. Not that, I got 10 points for clocking in on time or something. I don't know. But
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So your intention is being kind, and you're putting that out there, and then it is being received, and someone's acknowledging your intention of kindness. And those are the kinds of affirmations that I think that we really need, because
right.
we want to navigate our lives with kindness and love, and especially at your job, if you can infuse your love into your job and that is received. I mean, I don't, any book that I write or any painting that I do or whatever is so much fun as a creative thing. But if I'm working with a kid with special needs and I can see that that's a positive interaction and that the kids get, I'm like, that's just great. So anybody else can say whatever they want. They're receiving what I'm trying to put out there. And I think that is something that really just, enhances our day-to-day lives so much. It doesn't happen every day. And sometimes work is really hard and whatever, we don't want to go. But when that happens, that's more important, like you said, than getting a, 10 stars or whatever. It's very true.
Very true. I think I said Darren instead of Devyn. So
no, I didn't even notice. Thank you. No worries.
Okay.
I was having this interesting talk with my wife. We're both doing Duolingo, different languages, whatever, but she updates me on like where she is in her league and who's in front of her and how many points she earned. And I'm like, what are you even talking about? I'm just trying to learn a language. So I think some people pay attention to that stuff and it's like affirming, or, it's sort of a kick in the pants if you see that you should be doing a little more work. Some people need that external star system as you're describing. I think there is something to that, but I think again we're dealing with different personality types.
Right.
All that.
Yeah.
Every time I'm on Duolingo, I'm like, can we just get past these stupid screens? Stop telling me how good I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is just wasting my time.
And some people need that encouragement. When I work with students, some students really benefit from the encouragement, and getting a star means the world to them. And some, it's not as motivating. So you have to find other ways to motivate them. Being competitive can be such an amazing thing. Like when you watch the Olympics, and I'm amazed at what people can do with their bodies when they're ice skating or whatever, and they want to win, but they're also really good. I don't have that competitive gene. I never have. Yeah. And so that's why I think status is really interesting for me, because I'm not competitive, and I'm kind of fine with being by whatever I don't even think what my status would be. It's definitely not high ranking. But I can see that kind of makes the world go round. And so I think that that's really interesting. But yeah, some people do need those external rewards, and that's okay too.
One thing you just kind of alluded to, and I think we got to go soon, but again, thank you so much for this wonderful couple of hours.
You all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the world kind of needs the competitive people and the alpha perception people, like the hierarchy exists kind of organically, whether we like it or not. There are always improvements to be made. But I think, some of us are very comfortable being on kind of the anonymous side of things. And, introverts like me, staying home and not interacting is like heaven, right? So I think we need that diversity, and like celebrities are a natural outcome of that. Sure. Some of us have no dream or aspiration of being on television ourselves, but we love watching TV. Right. So I think this complexity is really important. The different personalities, whether we like the Kardashians or not, I'm sure they do play some kind of important role that I'm not privy to understanding. But there's something to that. It's filling a need.
Yeah.
That does organically exist in our society.
It does. Yeah. It's there whether or not we understand it. And I think maybe people in my age category we're not going to understand what the younger generation are all about. So in some contexts, again, I go back to Fran Lebowitz, who says, I think you really only understand your contemporaries. So it gets really hard to, give or take 10 years, we can have empathy for them, but to really understand, what other people are experiencing is sometimes not easy to do, because it's not our experience. We grew up in the world differently depending on our age and whatever we've been doing with our lives. But the awareness that yes, we need people who are a certain type of get out there and get certain things done. And that's why we have amazing architecture and advances in medicine and all these amazing things that we need. There are people who are just competitive to the bone and will get out there and do it, or present themselves in a certain way that they catch our attention. And a celebrity can kind of serve as a proxy for a version of ourselves that we never intend to put out there, but we see ourselves in them somehow, even though, that we don't want to be that. We wouldn't want to try to even attempt that. but it's a version of ourselves that we can kind of project onto them, and that's why it's so important.
Indeed. Yeah, thanks so much, Devyn. Once again,
Thank you.
the book, Anthropology of Celebrity, an examination of social prestige in popular culture, available where you buy books, which I think is Amazon.
Yeah, I did a free book promo. I think it might still be going on for the Kindle version. I think I have it going through today, or maybe it ended yesterday. I don't know, but I do that every now and then. It's only like $4 on Kindle, and then I think the book is it's $8. I like the book better. I just think it's prettier, and I like having the book, but I love Kindle too. But yeah, it's not. Anybody who wants to read it, please do so. I might have a few extra copies here if anybody wants one. I'll mail you one. But I just moved, so I haven't even unpacked yet. I've been here like one day, so I've got a load of books somewhere, but I don't know where they are. But thank you all so much. I really, really enjoyed today.
Yeah, I'm glad you got the internet set up.
Yes, definitely. I was worried about that for a minute.
Yeah.
I appreciate you all so much. I really, really do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Until next time.
Yes.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.